Hello, Year 12. This is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through explanations of resistance to social influence. And like the specification usually names two explanations, we're going to look at social support and locus of control. But first of all, let me just explain explanations for resistance. So as you've been doing this course, we've been looking at two kind of big concepts. We're looking at conformity and obedience, and in the experiments that we looked at, we are saying that the participants conformed or they obeyed. But I suppose not everyone agrees with this, and especially if you look at some of the numbers and kind of how low the particular conformity rates may be, or how low the obedience rates could be. So you could flip this over and go, okay, so not everyone did conform and not everyone did obey. And those people who don't, you could say, are resisting conformity or social influences to conform or to obey. And so that's what this particular topic will be looking at. So first of all, we just see that that's just kind of effectively what I've been saying, that we've we've gained insight into conformity and obedience, but we know from the studies that not everyone does. And there could be a number of reasons. And so I do go through a lot of extra reasons. So there could be a moral reason why people may resist authority. And in the lesson, I will go through a moral dilemma with you, and we'll be able to kind of see kind of how maybe that could influence the outcome of Milgram. And this is kind of the outcome of Milgram. He said that if you based your decisions on general moral principles, justice over social order, you are defined. So, for example, if you're quite rigid in your thoughts about, okay, so Hans has done something wrong and therefore he needs to be punished, then you were more likely to be obedient. But if you thought, well, Hans actually helped somebody, so therefore he needs to be forgiven for what he's done, then maybe you were more able to resist. So the reason I mention morals is that, of course, it's an example of saying that there are actually more than one explanation as to why people resist, and morals may certainly be one of them. But we have been asked specifically to look at two, social support and locus of control. Now, I have to obviously warn you that we've already done social support. We looked at one of the variables that affected conformity, and when one of them was unanimity, and when people stood up against the group, we were able to have less conformity. But now we're just framing it in a different way and looking at it specifically in terms of resistance. So let's have a look at this. So the first thing we can say is that when people are in a situation of normative social influence, we can resist the power of the group if we have the presence of the dissenter. Okay, so the dissenter plays a role of social support. So we see from Ash's research that the presence of a dissenter, and this is even if they don't actually give the same answer as to what the participant wants to give, we find that the conformity rates dropped. Therefore, more people were conforming. So what we then can say, well, why does this happen? So explanations for resistance. Why does this happen? It says it's because people feel free to follow their own conscience. And it's just simply because somebody else has challenged that particular group. Now, we also know that this is something that is just a slight nuance to this. It said that if the dissenter then changes back to the group, we find that the participants would do so as well. So resistance is quite interesting in that potentially it can be influenced by other social influence and factors as well, like the person that has enabled us to feel free, kind of changing allegiance and going back to the group may also influence us as well. Now, this is also found in Milgram's variations. So it's not just Ash that demonstrate to us that social support is important. In one of Milgram's variations that we didn't study as part of our situational variables, he had two disobedient confederates. So what you would have is a situation where the actual participant is still the person who works the machine and gives the shock. But then you have other people helping out. So, for example, one person would read the question and the other person would decide whether they got it right or wrong. And in this particular case, what we do is we just ask them to start questioning or refusing to obey. And we find that this is a very low obedience rate. In other words, when we are in the presence of other people, in other words, social support, who are doing the thing that we want to do, we also are able to resist the social influence of obedience. So what we found that by somebody else being defiant, we found ourselves able to be disobedient as well. And you could say that we model their disobedient behavior. And I suppose we already knew this, that when we are in a difficult situation, maybe you're called to go and see Mr. Bell, you might ask a friend to come with you. And we know that the presence of somebody else is kind of gives us a lot more kind of support and encouragement to be able to do what we need to do. So it's not meant to be a very long topic, and it's kind of building on what we've done before, but there we are. So I do have some evaluation. Now, of course, what we can do is refer to the Milgram and the ASH examples of where participants change their behavior according to the variable and use that as our support. But I've also got some additional kind of points that we can have. And Alan and Levine basically helped us with viewing whether having social support is going to be important. Okay, so that's why it's research support. I find this research particularly interesting, and it does validate, as it says, that the pressures to conform may be influenced by the presence of others. So they did an ASH type of experiment, so nothing's new there. And they also did the unanimity variation, okay? But the person that was challenging the group was either somebody with poor eyesight or with normal vision. Okay, so the person with poor eyesight will obviously have signs of poor eyesight, kind of either even like a kind of a cane to show that they're kind of partially sighted, or kind of thick glasses to kind of indicate that they can't see, or they might say something, but pretty much they have poor eyesight or normal vision. Now, as you would expect, of course, it said that both of these situations provided social support. So even though, of course, we would accept the normal vision variant, it is very likely that even the person who is partially sighted also offered support, because what they were doing is challenging the group's unanimity. And so what happened is the participants resisted. So we see that this does actually support the view that social support gives the person the ability or frees them up from the pressure of the group. The second bit of evaluation comes from Mullen, and this is also social support for the role of disobedience. Okay, so the first one was conformity, this is now disobedience. And what he just simply did is he had disobedient models breaking the law by jaywalking. So this is something probably more in America than in the UK, but if you cross over the road in a place that's not designated, it could be seen as being illegal. And of course, once again, you're more likely to jaywalk when we see a disobedient model kind of doing the same thing. And maybe we've experienced this when we've been waiting for the green man at a pedestrian crossing and we see somebody else cross the road. So therefore, they've been disobedient to the rules that they should stop. So therefore, we are able to be disobedient and go as well. So this, of course, does support the idea that disobedience do increase resistance. And then the last thing was Gramson said that there were higher levels of disobedience because the participants, when the participants were in groups. So he did a similar type of social support research, but was finding that we're more likely to able to resist when we're in a group. Obviously, this could be used in a practical sense in terms of, civil disobedience, in terms of situations where we're trying to stand up for your rights. I know that there's a book outside Mr. Bell's office where you write things in, and it's likelihood that you'll have a much stronger bravado if you're able to kind of do things in groups rather than by yourself. Now, this was always meant to be a short video because it's a very short topic, and therefore I trust that you can pair this with the previous notes you've had on social support and be able to come up with at least one solid reason for why people are able to resist obedience and conformity. Thank you very much.